Hello and welcome to Tug Talks with Damon. My very special guest today is Dr. Gall Mayer, excellent activist, doctor, healer, member of our community. It is so good to have you in the tub.
You're too kind.
I'm three kinds.
Three kinds.
I'm three kinds. So I'm so glad you're here. I have known you for so long. I've admired your work and your friendship for so long. It's really a treat to have you in the tub.
That's so sweet. Love that.
And I just want to make sure when you speak up, because sometimes if people can't hear you, they're going to tell me, which is actually good because I'd rather people watch and complain that they can't hear people than to not watch at all. But I'm asking all the guests to speak up.
Got it.
Okay. How does it feel to be here?
Warm and bubbly and super friendly.
Yay! Okay. So, Gall, the first thing I'm asking, or one of the first things I'm asking my guests, is what do you like most about your body?
What do I like most about my body? I kind of like my body, so there's a lot of things to choose from.
Bring it on.
I've been told I have a nice smile. I think I have a nice ass. I've been told I have a nice chest. I like the hair on my body.
Yeah.
I like my brain. It's part of my body.
So body, mind, spirit?
And yeah, my legs. Oh, yeah.
These legs?
Yeah.
Yes.
I get a lot of compliments on my legs.
Great. I'm glad. I always like hearing this. This is why I ask these conversations. What do you want to say?
No.
We were saying before, these conversations are like the opposite of the show you were telling me about.
Oh, yeah. When on Nip Tuck.
Nip Tuck.
Yeah.
So they used to start the show by saying...
It started with a consultation, and the surgeon would look at the patient and say, tell me what you don't like about your body.
Right.
Yeah.
So, unlike that show, this show is very much the opposite.
The antidote.
Yes.
The antidote.
The antidote.
Body dysmorphia.
To body dysmorphia, to body hatred.
Yeah.
That's one of my not-so-secret agendas about doing a show in a bathtub like this. So one of the things you mentioned was that you like your body, you like your hair, and I know that some of the attention you get out there in the world, whether it's at the conferences we go to, or the clubs we go to, or on social media, you definitely get a lot of energy.
Yeah.
Tell me about what that is, and what that's like for you.
It's interesting because I think, I've definitely reached like the daddy age, and there's a whole generation of younger guys who just really dig kind of like the daddy look, and I have it, and I feel like, even though my body is not as fit and trim and toned as it used to be, I get way more attention now than I probably have ever in my adult life.
Ever than before?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
And you are 53 now.
I'm 53 now.
Just making sure I was doing the math. So
yeah.
At 53, you're getting more of that energy, more of that sexual erotic energy being sent your way.
Yeah.
What do you make of that? What do you account for that being that?
Well, what do I make of that?
Yeah. Did you ever think at 23 that you'd be getting this kind of attention at 53?
Well, so that is a very, very important point, which is that when we were in our 20s and 30s, there really wasn't, as far as I knew, this culture of attraction toward the older generation. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to remember, like, you and I were both sort of born on the cusp of, folks who are 5, 6, 7 years older than us were completely slammed by HIV. Like, we sort of knew about HIV before we became sexually active. But, people who are just a few years older than us didn't. And I feel like, when I was younger, the generation that would have been daddies to me, a lot of them were gone, sadly. A lot of them were frightened. And a lot of them were HIV infected and probably more like, what is this? This is a assumption that probably more interested in sexual relations with other HIV infected people. Like there was a lot of siloing, right, of the sex in that era.
Right.
But so we didn't. I never imagined it because I didn't have the reciprocal experience of like going to bars there were no apps and meeting guys who were older than me and finding them attractive. But that's just my experience. I don't know, maybe other people, your experience may vary.
But we didn't really have a lot of role models of people in their 50s who were emanating sexuality in such an empowered way, at least not as a cohort. We didn't really get that the way we're doing today, the way people can see us today.
Yeah, I think the 90s particularly, and the aughts, as they're called, the 2000s, were eras of sex with fear for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was hard to exude a positivity about sexuality without running into the risk. I don't like that word, but it's I'm borrowing it from that era.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna bring back Ruth Bader Ginsburg here.
Oh,
So I have some of our ducks here. So this is the
Well, get all your duckies in a
420
row.
dough and the Ruth Bader Ginsburg because they bring a lot of fun to this too. So you were saying earlier that you don't have, quote, the fit body that you were describing, and yet you get, you're in demand.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, objectively, I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go with that.
There's a lot of men who I find in life, in my work, who feel ashamed of their body hair, who feel like they should get rid of their body hair.
Yeah.
And yet have you ever felt pressured to do that?
Well, in the 90s, no one had body hair, and I used to trim my body. And I think, the funny thing is, I think one of the reasons that I like my body hair is that one time in the 90s, maybe the early 2000s, I went to San Francisco and met this guy who was like a manscaper. Like he sort of made money like, manscaping hairy men. And I went, it sounded like a blast, so I went. And he did a couple of things, like a few things here and there, and then he stood back and he's like, you really got hair in all the right places. Like, I don't want to mess with this too much. And then I was like, okay. Like, what if a manscaper didn't want to touch my hair? Then okay, let's go with it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And it never got shaved since then.
I never shaved it
Uh-huh.
because I always thought the stubbly, like ingrowny look was not cute, and that's what I would have. But I did trim it considerably when I was younger, but I think I stopped like around age 30 something probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And would you say it's objective to say that a lot of the people, a lot of the young men, a lot of men of all ages really prefer body hair on a man?
Well, I think for those who are looking for like the daddy type,
Mhm.
like it goes with the daddy type.
Goes with the daddy type.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you're in demand too.
Well, but it's interesting because I'm at the age where technically I'm getting the daddy stuff, but I don't necessarily get that fantasy a lot because I'm not hairy.
Yeah.
And
you have other daddy things going on.
I guess now I'm starting to have gray hair, so
Yeah.
people like that. And I think during the pandemic, it seemed like I was getting more of the daddy transference because a lot of younger people really appreciated the comfort of someone who had been through pandemics before, someone who had lived through some really shitty times before.
Wow.
And could kind of say, look, this is bad, but we're gonna be okay. Yeah. That's when I really started to feel like, okay, I'm kind of in that, I'm getting it. And I feel good about that.
I feel good about you getting that too.
Yeah. So, how does being out in the dating world, cruising world fit in with being in a primary relationship in your life?
That's a great question. I've never been in a very typical closed monogamous relationship. one very early relationship actually broke up because we'd never discussed monogamy, and I was under the impression that we weren't, and he was under the impression that we were. But I've never consciously entered into a monogamous relationship. I have this, kind of powerful rejection of that whole construct, and I think, and this, we've talked about this, like when you look at dramatic storylines on TV, in movies, if there is love involved, there's always betrayal involved, and the betrayal is the melodrama on which the plot rotates, and the betrayal is always, like virtually always, just sex with someone, and it never matters like what it meant and how it could fit in. And when I was young, I read The Ethical Slut, and it had a really lovely positive effect on me. And basically the treatise of the book is that sluts are just people who connect with other people through sex, and there's nothing wrong with that. And what becomes wrong with that is the not being transparent, not being open about it, not lying. That's where the betrayal happens. So the idea is, as long as you are in a truly informed, consensual relationship with someone where you're both on the same page as to what can go on, then there's no greater value on monogamy than non-monogamy.
And how do you establish that? How do you establish these parameters and boundaries in the relationship?
I think that has changed slightly as I've gotten older and been through more relationships. But in my current relationship, I was very upfront about it from right when we saw that this may be more than just a hookup. We had that discussion, and it went really well.
Have you ever had someone say, no, I just can't handle this, I can't be with you, too much for me?
No, but I haven't, it's not like I've had a million relationships, but, so far, no. It was always an agreement. And I think, the idea is, I have a lot of thoughts about this, the idea is when you're my age and you grew up gay, you had to define all the rules about love and sex for yourself because there was no model to follow. And it wasn't like now where you can go online and look up a million things and find, other models. It was just, I grew up gay and closeted in isolation. And so I had to think about, and the advantage of being gay is that you're already rejecting the paradigm, right? So you're rejecting the heterosexual paradigm. So then for me, it was like, well, what about all the things that go with it? What if this is not the only way to be? And I think, that's how I came into it, but I don't remember the question now. What was your question?
How do you bring this up? How do you establish these boundaries or parameters in relationships?
Right. Yeah, I went on a tangent, but it's okay.
Yeah, so I kind of think of it as the Broadway rule. So in Broadway, it's generally established that you can take the audience anywhere you want them to go as long as you establish what's reality in the first 15 minutes.
Right.
So if you're in this alternative reality where witches are green and, goblins are your teachers, you can do that as long as you establish that early on.
Right.
If you want to live in a reality where there's this street in Brooklyn where puppets, interact with each other with humans and Gary Coleman all day, that's fine as long as you establish that right off the bat.
Right.
And I often think in relationships, it's like, okay, as long is, it's often works better when that can be established early on. When whomever, two people or whomever is in this relationship, establish these parameters earlier than later.
Well, I think that part of being in a relationship is having values in common, right? And I think that's a really important part of being in a relationship. And it makes it so much easier when you share values. And, you know, if you are able to talk to someone about your worldview and they either see it the same way, or in my case, had some dissatisfaction looking at it another, you know, the traditional way and tried to see it this way, I think as long as you're open, so to speak, you know, those conversations can go well.
Yeah. Now, of course, people are going to ask, what happens when you get jealous? What happens when you feel jealousy toward the other person? Or they feel jealousy toward you?
Well, you know, jealousy and envy are parts of being human, and they're parts of every relationship. And whether you're monogamous or not monogamous, you can feel those things. That's one. So we all have to have a mechanism to deal with those energies and feelings. And the second is that it's important to know is that jealousy is not a natural, inevitable consequence of seeing your partner with someone else or enjoying themselves without you.
So what is there instead?
Compersion.
Ah, my favorite word.
Yeah.
Say it. So what is compersion for the audience here?
Compersion is the joy of seeing someone that you love enjoying themselves with someone other than you.
So the joy in someone else's joy.
Yeah, the joy in someone else's joy.
Wow. How do you do that? What happens? How do you feel joy for someone if you're not directly involved or part of it?
For me, it's really key that we have a defined connection that is just ours. Like it is for every couple, right? Every couple needs to have that connection. I think the only difference is that connection doesn't include sexual, what's the word I'm looking for? That connection doesn't include sexual exclusivity, right? Mm-hmm. So I think if you're able to establish a connection that feels stable and mutual and loving and bidirectional, I guess that's the same thing as mutual, without necessarily bringing sexual exclusivity into it, then I think you can know or watch or hear or whatever your partner having fun and enjoying themselves without you, without feeling like that you're getting less love because they're giving something to more. And that, you know, also speaks to what we have talked about many times, which is that love is a bottomless well. And I think, you know, this deficit economy, the way we think about love, like, oh, I only have 100 loves, and if I give them all to you, I have nothing left for no one else, and if I give 10 to them, there's only 90 for you. I think that's just all a huge construct. And you know, one of the powerful things about that book, The Ethical Slut, the point they make is the analogy to having a child born, right? So when there's one child, both parents love that child with all their heart. And then a second child is born, and it's not like they have to love that child with half of their heart, because the other half goes to the other child. It's like they also love this child with all of their hearts. And it may sound weird to compare that to sex, but it really is proof that love is not, it doesn't diminish when you spread it around. I think it only grows.
Right.
I think it only grows.
Right. That's how I see it. It's not an issue of subtraction. It's not a capitalistic framework.
Right.
That of scarcity.
Right.
That it's actually more about a multiplication. That the more we give, the more we witness, the more we share, the more there is.
Right.
But the thing I get asked all the time, so what about insecurity? When you're let's say everybody's on that mindset, but you're sitting there and you're watching your partner have amazing euphoric sex with someone else. Don't you, this is the question I get asked, don't you get insecure about yourself at those times?
First of all, I think it's important to say that in my current relationship, we don't actually have a relationship where I'm necessarily with one exception that I can get to later, where I'm necessarily like in the room and watching them.
Mhm.
So it's more like just knowing,
Mhm.
you know? And I never feel insecure in my connection to Cliff because we talk about it all the time. We have established a secure connection. We talk about the feelings that we have with other people. We and we also acknowledge that the kind of head spinning, swirling disorientation that comes from having a new lover is not necessarily accessible between two people who love each other and know each other and are intimate with each other in other ways. And but what I have with Cliff takes work and time and input, and it's stable because I built a brick house for those little piggies. I didn't build one out of straw, right?
Yeah. So you really built a relationship home on a solid foundation, intentionally.
Yeah.
With communication.
Right. And room to grow.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for answering that, because these are some of the things that I know people think about and struggle with. Even people who have been in long-term monogamous relationships who are thinking about wanting to open things up and don't always know how to do it.
Right. It is, I think it is harder to shift course than it is to set a course from the beginning. And I've never had to do that, so I can't really be helpful in that regard. But I can totally understand, when something changes. But I think that's also part of being in a relationship, right? If you're in a good relationship, you are helping each other grow, right? And one of the things that happens when you grow is you may grow in a different direction than you were where you started. And we change as we age and as we go through the relationship. And I think, remaining open to the idea that things can change is very healthy.
Right.
For a relationship.
If more, in my opinion, if more people did that or thought that way, there would be a lot less divorce. There would certainly be a lot less need for marriage family therapists.
Right.
Or if my role would be more one of keeping things together proactively versus reactively.
Right.
But unfortunately, sometimes people don't even begin these conversations till after someone has been traumatized or harmed or hurt in some way. And it's kind of hard to go back and repair that. Not impossible, but it's much more of an uphill climb at that point. Yeah. So I appreciate your transparency, and I appreciate how much you're open. I think your being open about your life and your thoughts and your experience has always served our community. And I think so I just want to reflect that you have served our community for decades in a medical capacity.
I've tried.
You have.
Yeah.
You have.
Yeah.
So there was about, I think, a decade that you were the director of Callen-Lorde.
That's right.
And that was in an era between 2000
It was 2005 to 13.
To
so
13,
it's about 8
okay.
years.
So that's really interesting to think about gay, queer, trans health during that era.
Yeah.
Between about 2005 to 2013. What have been some of the changes between when you were the director of Callen-Lorde? What are some of the, if any, observations you made in terms of people's approaches to health and wellness over the last years?
You mean since I left there?
So I guess compared to when you were the director,
Yeah.
what were some of the issues that you would see on a regular basis that were affecting the LGBTQ plus community?
I used to have these conversations every once in a while when you're in these positions. Rarely, but every once in a while it happens that you actually have a moment to sort of philosophize and think vision, right? And I used to have these conversations with my executive director, and she said something that has always remained with me, always. Wendy, if you're watching this is for you. She said that her vision for a place like Callen-Lorde is that by coming there, our community begins to see themselves as people who are worthy of health and wellness, which is so profound when you think about it for people like us who grew up equating our sexuality with a deadly virus, right? And it's like illness came with the package deal. And you know, and transgender people have been told that it's a mental illness, right? And I think the idea that you can be LGBTQ, whatever, and worthy of health and wellness was back then kind of revolutionary. Like, and you know, when you really think about it, because anybody back then who had like a coming out process probably at some point faced, either from their own research or from someone that's really close to them, the idea that this was an illness, right? That their sexuality was an illness and needed to be fixed, and that there's that sickness paradigm that comes with being LGBTQ. And I really, really hope that's changing. And I think,
do you think it is changing?
I think that it is. You know, there have been these studies done that have shown that people's attitudes toward these like societal attitude studies that are done every year and plot trends, I forgot the name of it, but people's attitudes towards LGBT people specifically have, in terms of change toward acceptance, have been on a steeper incline than things like race, like gender, like disability. You know, our acceptance in society has really catapulted in the last 50 years. And so I don't, you know, I think, I don't know where the limits are for acceptance. But I think this ties back to the other conversation, because I think, you know, one of the consequences of acceptance is, and I don't mean this judgmentally, but mediocrity, like being just like everyone else, right? That's part of what happens with acceptance. And when you think about the big civil rights battles for LGBT people over the last couple of decades, you know, things like the right to marry and the right to serve in the military are not exactly groundbreaking. They're like really like Joe normal things to do, right? They're part of like the American dream. So I think we fought hard to become more average. And I think that's important, right? Because we deserve the right to be as average or as kooky as we want. But I think one of the things that has come with that is that perhaps that heterosexual monogamous paradigm feels more comfortable to someone, you know, who's growing up with a total acceptance of their sexual identity or gender identity. So I think that's there also. Like, you know, we used to be edgier as a community.
I kind of in my mind sort of have a divide between what I think is gay and what I think is queer.
Yeah.
Because I think, in my mind anyway, are you comfortable?
Yeah.
I think about gay as like kind of that idea of trying to, in some ways, be like everyone else or assimilate or get, you know, equality.
Yeah.
And nothing wrong with that, that's fine. But I don't really see it socially, culturally progressive insofar as it is just fighting bigotry and discrimination. I think queer is more kind of this forward-thinking idea. It's like, not only do we deserve to have rights legally, but also, as we said earlier, to challenge some of the paradigms that have harmed everybody in the past, heteronormative ideas of monogamy that have harmed people, to push forward culturally and getting people to think about things in a different way.
Agreed. I never like took classes in queer studies, but I've spoken to people who have, and you know, my impression of the word queer is that inherent to that word, there's a rejection of labels. Mm-hmm. And you know, it's for people who live between the boxes, not in them. And I think that's amazing. Like I don't know what my identity is identify as a gay man, but I don't know if I were coming into my sexuality in 2022. I don't know what other permutation of identities I would come up with. Like it's not clear to me, but it's fun to think about.
I don't know either. I mean, I know I had to think about gay as something assimilative. In the 80s, I had to think of it as something normal or assimilationist in order to come out.
Right.
Because there were like no role models. There was no one on TV. There was no Will and Grace. There was occasionally, like once a year, LA Law would have an episode where like a gay guy would be dying of AIDS, but at least you'd try to feel sorry for him. That's it. That's all we had.
Right.
So for me, it was really important in coming out to say, oh, I can have a full life, to explain that to my parents, to explain that to whomever. Like, okay, I can still be a therapist. I can still have a happy life. But then, like, with Queer Nation, I think 1991, 92, we started thinking about, the group started saying, let's take back these labels. Let's start embrace. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Let's use these labels like faggot, dyke, queer, and wear them as shirts, as hats, as apparels of pride. And really piss a lot of people off, not only in the straight community, but in the gay community, to really like generate anger around that. And now again, 30 years later, a lot of people just use queer, like queer should for the straight hood. I mean, queer guy for the straight guy. It's sort of just such, again, it's become, it feels to me like an assimilationist word in a way.
It's very much in flux. And I think for us, when we were coming out, gay felt like a very concrete label that we could latch onto, that was honest enough in what it said about us, but not as aggressive and in your face as faggot, right? I said that word, sorry.
I say to that.
So I think I think that's part of it, and I think the more freedom you have when you're establishing your identity, I think the freer you are to look at options beyond what they teach you in school, kind of thing.
Right.
Define them for yourself.
Right. And I do think maybe we've gotten there with gay and lesbian or queer. From your point of view, where are we at in terms of acceptance and understanding about people who are non-gender binary, who are not on the gender binary? Because I think when you started at Callen-Lorde, I know you have been in a position of teaching and training other providers to try to understand the humanity and intricacies of giving responsible, compassionate treatment to someone who is non-gender binary. Non-binary.
Yeah.
I apologize. So do you think that's changed or is changing?
Interestingly, that term wasn't used when I was there at Callen-Lorde in like the aughts.
What was the term in 2005?
Genderqueer.
Genderqueer.
Yeah, which is a really...
So that was, what would you use like instead of transgender?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was like, I'm not classifying myself as, we used to use this terminology, and please forgive me because some of them are considered not okay now, but the terminology was like male to female, transgender, female to male, transgender.
Which was still that binary kind of thinking.
Right.
Yeah.
And then genderqueer, we're like, I'm not sure I started as male or female, I'm not sure I'm looking to end up as male or female, right?
So how familiar do you recall other doctors or medical professionals how familiar were they with these concepts, with these terms in 2005?
Very unfamiliar, so much so that, I used to teach, I used to do like an hour-and-a-half workshop on treating the transgender patient, but we always had to start with like at least a half hour of like, this is what pronouns mean, this is what gender identity is, this is what a spectrum means, right, of identity. This is what gender expression is. I would be talking to almost an exclusively cisgender audience, and I would challenge them to think about all the decisions they make about their appearance, whether they're wearing a tie or earrings or ponytail or heels or skirt or pants. Whatever decision they made about how they're going to present to the world, they are trying to broadcast to the world what they feel inside, right? Like, and who they are. And if I could get them to see that we cisgender people have gender expression, that it is a deliberate thing that we do. We just don't call it that. Then it was easier to get them on board for some of the other things, like the idea that if someone shows up to your clinic with a dress and makeup on, even if you suspect that they were assigned male at birth or they have stubble or whatever, ask them the pronoun. And my assumption at that time would be that they want to be seen as female, right? And to respect that.
Wow. So back in 2005, these were really new concepts.
They were. I had this, PowerPoint deck that I did, going over the medications and all of what to expect and the side effects and all the terminology, and it was so high in demand. I could have given it in my sleep. I gave it so many times in so many circumstances. Wow. Adapted it for CME stuff, and it was really it was a lot of people at that time. We used to exchange slides. People would use my slides, I'd use other people's slides, but it was it was really powerful. I don't think that transgender people themselves had as much of a voice in my profession as they do now, and it was a really powerful experience to go out there and advocate for something that is not yours. Yeah.
Do you think that has changed, in terms of representation in the medical profession?
I do. I don't think that anybody has enough, right, empowerment and voice at the table. Anybody in the LGBT community, but there are definitely, it was very hard to find a transgender medical provider back when I was in 2005. It was nearly impossible. And now it's much more common, right? There's a whole generation of people coming out of training as a whatever medical provider you are, or healthcare provider. There's a whole generation of people who grew up with much more open ideas about transgender identity.
Yeah, and I think to the better, they're demanding inclusion in medical curriculums. Absolutely. Demanding representation. Absolutely. In classrooms.
I would, so as an example, I would never be the person who does that teaching today. Mm-hmm. I would find a transgender person to go out there and do that teaching, right? Because I had to speak for people who at the time, didn't really have anyone's ear. And I had their ear. So I gave my, cis refracted version of it that made it safe for other people. But today, there's no way I would talk about, I would try to teach people about, something that I'm not personally part of.
Right. And that there really are other medical professionals now who are
Thankfully,
non-binary who can do that.
Yeah.
What's it like for you to see that change? To witness this?
What's it like? I mean, it's very fulfilling, right? Because it's it's lovely to see the world change for the better. There are so many ways in which the world is not changing for the better, that it's lovely to see that. And then on a personal level, it's also very fulfilling because I do feel like I played a tiny little role in setting the stage for that to happen. And it makes me feel like my work had lasting meaning, and it's really nice. Yeah.
It has.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you in this club and asking you to do this, because I think your work has contributed in many ways that we know of, in many other ways, to our general health in this community, in the world. So, wait, I'm going to shift a little bit too. Are you comfortable? Yeah. Okay. So, again, because you have been so open, generous, and transparent, I think that's helped people. May I ask you more now about your recovery process?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Okay. So you tell me, when I say recovery, what that has meant to you, and what is that?
Yeah. So right when the pandemic started, I'm starting in the middle of the story. The basic thing is that I was a meth user that was very, very functional for about 10 years. I, really didn't have many of the incredibly awful consequences that some other meth users experience, and I was somehow miraculously able to hold my life together pretty well considering how much I was using. And I wasn't a daily user, I was an intermittent user. And around, there was a point around the beginning of the pandemic, when everybody was locked down, especially in New York City. The company I work for very generously allowed people who are medical professionals to take volunteer leave and go be useful. And I went and volunteered at Woodhull Hospital. My role was to test the employees for COVID, but it felt like being part of the solution. And it was such a powerful feeling that by the end of it, there was like this perfect storm of all these things that happened that made me realize, but I think one of the bigger influences was just my thought that my feeling that I was someone that I am important to myself. I think that's what it was. That I am capable of being part of the solution, and I'm capable of showing up when I'm needed, and I'm a good person. And I didn't necessarily consciously realize that I didn't think those things. But when they were reinforced in this very concrete way, the question came up, why am I destroying my life with this drug? And luckily that question came up at the right time, and there's a whole bunch of stupid little stories that lead to this, but basically I started 2.5 years ago, I started going to a recovery group, and I stopped using, and it's been fantastic.
Wow. What are some of the good parts or fantastic parts about not using?
Well, so there were the immediate rewards of like not being tired all the time, and all the things that I consciously attributed to my use. And then there was this hidden layer of benefits that was about, I suddenly realized like my mood was much better. I wasn't feeling depressed as often. My relationships with people that are important in my life improved, and I didn't realize consciously what a burden I had been placing on those folks. Friends that I used to go on vacation with, and family members. And, I thought I hid it well, and in a way I did, but I didn't, they all eventually told me like, I just didn't seem like I was myself. So I got myself back, which is awesome. And then I met Cliff, and there is no way I would have been available for this amazing relationship if I had met him while using. I didn't show up in an authentic way to anywhere. I was either high or hiding the fact that I was coming down. So that's been a benefit. And then, I adopted a dog, which has been something I've been thinking about my whole life, but haven't done yet partly because I wasn't sure how responsible I would be. So it's been, I'm not saying that it's been easy, but it's really been all benefit, I think I stopped using, meth is a drug that's in our community very intimately tied to sex. And it absolutely facilitated for me some sexual experiences that I don't think I would have ever gotten to without it. I mean, it was, there, it really opened doors that way. But after a while, I went through all these like fantasies and sexual experiences that I'd always wanted to do, and then I went through them again, and then I would do, and after a while, that sort of loses its luster a little bit. And the thing that really happened is that I realized it opened a lot of doors sexually, and in every other way, it was actually taking me away from the person that, from the best version of myself, and the person I worked so hard to be, and from the person I wanted to become. And that was a price, I'm really happy that I stopped paying that price.
Yeah.
That was devastating.
So a lot of times people talk about hitting their limit or hitting bottom in order to stop using. It sounds like for you, there was not really necessarily that moment. Or
You're gonna love
there?
this, but the terminology in recovery is that I was a high bottom.
Oh.
Not that I had a high bottom, but I just love the term high bottom. For obvious reasons.
Okay, that means
I was a high
you didn't
bottom.
really have
And then I hit a high bottom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you didn't really have that moment in the emergency room or in jail or waking up in the street where where your life was being threatened, but you certainly saw the trajectory.
The last week that I used, one of the events that sort of led up to my stopping was that I combined the wrong two drugs and got really, really sick. And that was the closest I've ever come to calling 911. I was actually scared for my life.
Was it cut with something else?
No, there was somebody had left a bag of something that turned out to be this other drug that didn't mix well with meth, and I was just being stupid and experimental and, sticking my fingers in the electric socket to see what would happen.
Yeah. So how then did you make this change? You mentioned going to meetings. Now this was during the pandemic, so that was all virtual at the time. Okay.
Yeah.
What else was helpful in this process?
Well, they say in recovery that the opposite of addiction is connection. And I, connected with people in the program. I got myself a sponsor. I would text, and one of the things that we do is like exchange gratitude lists. Like every day I would like write a gratitude list and send it to a bunch of other addicts in recovery. And I think like I've since had sponsees myself, and I've talked to them about this idea of like, if you wallpaper your life with recovery, and like every time you look at your phone, there's a text from someone, and there's a meeting to go to, and there's an assignment to do, and there's a sponsor to meet with, and it's like, if it's all over your life, you're just gonna have less time and space for for using or for being tempted to use.
Yeah.
So I think it goes beyond meetings. This idea of fellowship where it's the camaraderie of addicts in recovery that happens outside of meetings. Yeah.
And why do you think in the gay community, gay male community specifically, it is so meth is so tied to sexual activity? What is that connection?
I mean, it's probably, I'm not up on the neurotransmitters, but it's something pretty hardwired. Dopamine, reward stuff.
What is it like in my experience, in general, straight people get high, they often prefer the opiate family, or they often prefer mellow drugs. In my experience, gay people are so much more frequently drawn to meth or things in the amphetamine family.
Yeah.
I'm often just curious as to why that is. I have a few theories, but do you think there's any Like, what is it about meth that is so alluring for gay men?
I haven't really thought about it beyond just, for many of us, sex is just a central part of life and connecting with people. And when you take a drug, and hooking up with sex means meeting people and being vulnerable and intimate with someone that you don't really know. And sometimes appropriately, a lot of walls can come up around the idea of that. And then you take a drug that's disinhibiting, and it makes that whole journey so much less anxiety provoking, and for me, and more pleasurable. And I was just able to let my proverbial, I only have proverbial hair, but I was able to let my proverbial hair down and really get into it, and it was fabulous. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, it was a really fun time, and I regret some of the things that I did to myself and other people while I was using, but I don't regret the actual using. And the sex was only part of it. The reason I don't regret the actual using is because it was only through using that I came into this process of recovery, which has been the steepest self-improvement slope of my life, So, and I think, I don't know, not everyone has circumstances in life that really force them to completely change their patterns, start over in some ways, and become very mindful and conscious about the ways that we sabotage ourselves and that we are complicit in our own undoing, right?
So when we think about recovery, you're referring not just to the abstinence of using meth, but you're talking about a whole reframe of thinking about thinking about your life, thinking about your mind, thinking about...
And recovery, I've always thought recovery is the worst word for this, right? That's recovery.
You know what word I use?
Discovery. Yeah. I love it.
I say discovery, not recovery, because I think recovery is you want to recover. I don't think we want to recover. We want to discover these new parts of ourselves.
And in medicine, recovery implies going back to your baseline, right? And that is certainly not what happened. I hurtled past my baseline and really started, lovely things happened.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing this. So somebody who's watching this right now and thinking, I think I might have a problem, but I don't know if I have a problem, and if I do have a problem, I don't know what to do about it. What might you offer or say to that person?
I would probably say, first of all, if you think you have a problem, there are very few mistakes made on the you don't actually have a problem side of that thinking. You probably have a problem. So if you think you have a problem, you probably do. And the only way that this program works is if you seek it out and get help. I mean, some people are mandated into it by the criminal justice system and all that, and I'm sure it works out for people sometimes that way too. But there's got to be at least a part of you that is really wants to stop. And I think once you have that, then seek out, go to crystalmeth.org and look for a meeting and just start going.
So if someone doesn't know if they want to stop, they think they might just want to evaluate or slow down, do you think it's okay for them to check out a meeting or go to a meeting or listen to some of these experiences in a meeting?
I mean, meetings have their rules, a lot of meetings have rules that if you're high, they don't that you don't share. And they commonly say, we want to hear from you, not the drug, which is valid. But I think, for me, life is just one long experiment without a control. And we just have to continuously gather data. The important thing is gathering the data, right? You have to actually gather it and look at it. So if you think that you are going to be okay if you slow down, consciously decide what okay looks like, slow down and see if you get there, right?
Yeah. And in today's virtual world, if someone wanted to just go to an open meeting, anywhere in the world, if they're sitting at their computer, as long as it's an open meeting, would you say it's okay to check it out? Check out an open meeting where you're allowed to come in and just listen.
For this fellowship, the only requirement to be in the meeting is the desire to stop using.
But again, what if they don't want to stop? What if they're watching this and they're like, I don't want to stop, I just maybe want to control it better.
Audit?
Or maybe consider stopping, but not quite there yet.
Exploring. I think exploration is good, go check out an open meeting.
So I was saying that because I think sometimes people are ambivalent before they're ready to take that kind of action the way you did.
Yeah.
And sometimes they think, oh, well, I can't go to a meeting unless I'm absolutely certain my intention is to stop.
Yeah.
And I encourage people to say, especially now in the virtual world, to say, well, why don't you listen? Why don't you check it out as long as it's open?
Yeah.
But is that bad advice?
I think this idea of that I can't engage in any part of recovery unless I really want to stop is actually the drug talking. It's the addict behind the wheel who's trying to maintain control of the vehicle.
So you're saying that's more like the drug part of them saying, I don't actually want to stop.
It's an excuse.
Okay.
Right? It's like if you're interested in recovery and you're interested in making that improvement in your life, go check it out. Don't let somebody in your head tell you like that's not right for you.
Okay. So checking out a meeting, an open meeting.
Yeah.
And is cool.
And there's other fellowships too, right? Like some fellowships are total abstinence based, and some of them are more harm reduction. If you're seeing a mental health professional, ask for help in finding the right one, or the internet's a great resource for this.
Yeah, great. I think this information is important, and I ask this because we've had these conversations, but I also do get asked. I mean, the 26 years I've been a therapist now, serving the LGBTQ community, this one's a staple.
Yeah.
Is meth as a drug that often has, as you point out, no doubt, some potentially positive, interesting learning qualities.
Right.
But then can very quickly cross the line into something being problematic and disruptive. And sometimes I know that people just feel like I don't know how to take that first step, or I don't want to go into a room, or, if I'm still using, or still like today is Wednesday, but I'm going to use Friday, but I think I might not want to use after Friday, that I could still check out a meeting and think about start to formulate a plan for how this is going to play out in a healthy way.
In the 12-step paradigm, the first step is just admitting that you yourself cannot control your use. Which if you're
That's a hard one for a lot of people.
It is, but if you're contemplating going to a meeting to stop using, you've kind of already done that in your head. Otherwise, you would just stop using.
Okay.
And then the second step is like, recognizing that it takes someone outside of yourself to really recover. There's sometimes people think about God or higher power or whatever, but I think the point, share is a good one. But I think the point is that, if you think you need help, ask for it.
Yeah.
Ask for help, because it's the best, easiest way to get help is to ask for it.
Thank you. Your vulnerability and generosity, in my opinion, saves lives. And I think the way you're sharing right now, but also just throughout your entire career, have been open and generous with your experiences and your knowledge. You've saved lives. You know that. You know that for so many people of transgender experience are having a different, not everyone, but are having a different medical experience today. If they go into Callen-Lorde, if they go into an emergency room in New York City today, it is quite possible that the experience they're going to have today would be different from 20 years ago. And that is partly contributing from you.
Yeah, a tiny little part of that.
Is there anything I have not asked you that you would like to talk to the masses or share with the bathtub audience in the world?
There's so many things, but we can have a part 2 sometime.
We can do part 2.
If this
is
ongoing. If you like this, ask for more.
Ask for more.
I'm a dirty boy, so baths are good. How
does it feel now that you've done a tough talk? How are you feeling at this moment?
I don't think I've ever talked about my recovery in a very public way, because it's pretty recent. And that kind of feels liberating. There's a part of me that wonders, I let the cat out of the bag, and now what's all this negative prediction stuff. But it is liberating, and I think if it can help anyone, I'm really glad I did it. I'm really glad I did it anyway, but it would be sweet if it helped someone.
I know it will. I know it has.
Oh.
All right, everybody. So we're just going to keep having conversations about the issues, the feelings, the experiences that shape our community and shape the community around us. And sometimes that means being vulnerable, and sometimes that means sharing some personal stuff. But I do think
stepping out of your comfort zone.
Stepping out of the comfort zone.
For sure.
Right? Stepping out of the comfort zone into the bubbles and making a difference. So I encourage you to have conversations with your friends, your family, your community about what that means to be healthy. Perhaps what that means to think about stopping a drug that's damaging your life, or contemplating stopping a drug, and how people can support each other in that process.
Or any behavior.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a drug. There are lots of ways that we undo ourselves.
Yeah. What is discovery? Because I like the word discovery because it's not specific always about a drug, but what does discovery look like as we are getting into our 50s, embracing our daddy aging stuff, getting into relationships that are playful and purposeful, and dealing with some of these problems that might interfere with our quality and quantity of life. So if you like these topics, subscribe down below. Push the red button, subscribe.
Push it.
I need more subscribers. Do it now. I'll wait.
You'll be
Okay.
glad.
If people want to follow you or hear more of your thoughts, how would you like for them to do that?
I don't have a big social media
Okay.
presence, but they can, put in the comments and we'll figure it out.
All right. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.
Bye.